welcome to the season finale of Noetic Resonance. Trigger warning, this episode contains detailed discussion of abuse including physical, emotional, psychological, financial, spiritual, and sexual abuse, as well as coercive control, trauma bonding, and relationship harm across all relationship types. If these topics are difficult for you, please listen with care and take breaks as you need to. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing shared here constitutes legal, medical, or therapeutic advice. If you are currently in a dangerous situation, please contact emergency services or in the U.S., the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788. Please search for your National Domestic Violence Helpline if you are in another country. You deserve to be safe and support is available. I want you to think about a relationship that cost you something, not just a romantic relationship. Any relationship, a parent, a friend, a pastor, a mentor, a sibling, a boss, someone whose presence in your life required you to become a smaller, more careful, more managed version of yourself. I want you to think about the version of you that existed before that relationship and the version that exists now. And I want you to ask honestly whether those two people feel like the same person. Because one of the clearest signs that a relationship is harming you is not always a dramatic moment. It is not always a raised fist or a screaming match. Sometimes it is quieter than that. It is the way you edit yourself before you speak. The way you monitor someone else's mood before you decide whether it is safe to have a need. The way you have become very good at making yourself smaller, less visible, less inconvenient, because you have learned that taking up space in this relationship comes with a cost. That exhaustion is real. That hypervigilance is real. And it is not love. It is not friendship. It is not mentorship or family or community. Whatever name it has been given, a relationship that requires your disappearance as the price of admission is not a safe relationship, and you deserve to know the difference. This episode is the finale of season 1, and I wanted to bring it all the way home. We have spent this entire season examining what was handed to us, what was true, what was constructed, and what we are allowed to release. This episode is about the most intimate application of all that work. The relationships in your actual life, the ones that are feeding you and the ones that are draining you, the ones that are calling you toward your wholeness and the ones that have been quietly dismantling it. Says who that you have to keep every relationship that has ever been given the name of love? Says who that family means unconditional access regardless of how they treat you? Says who that loyalty requires you to absorb harm without limit? We are going to answer those questions today, and then we are going to close season 1 the way it deserves to be closed, together. We spend so much time in our culture talking about what love is not. We are going to do some of that today, but I want to start somewhere different, because I want to start with what it actually is. Because one of the reasons people stay in harmful relationships is that they have never had a clear picture of what they are supposed to be moving toward. If you grew up in a home where love was conditional, where affection came with strings, where conflict meant someone got hurt, then you may have spent your whole life navigating relationships without a reliable map of what healthy actually looks like. So let us build that map before we go anywhere else. In a healthy relationship, you feel safe, not just physically safe, though that is non-negotiable, but emotionally safe. You can say what you actually think without calculating the cost first. You can have a need without it becoming a problem. You can be in a bad mood, make a mistake, disappoint the other person, and know that the relationship will survive it without punishment or withdrawal or an explosion that leaves you walking on eggshells for days afterward. In a healthy relationship, there is mutuality. Both people's needs matter. Both people's feelings are taken seriously. The relationship does not orbit one person's emotional state while the other person spends their energy managing it. Both people give and both people receive And when that balance gets off track, which it will because all relationships have seasons, both people notice and both people work to restore it. In a healthy relationship, accountability does not come with punishment. When someone hurts the other person, they can say so directly, and the response is genuine acknowledgement, not defensiveness, not blame shifting, not turning it around so that the person who raises the hurt ends up apologizing for raising it. Repair happens, and repair is followed by actual change, not just promises. In a healthy relationship, you are allowed to be a whole person. You have other connections that are not controlled or managed by this relationship. You have interests that are yours. You have opinions that differ, and those differences are interesting rather than threatening. Your individual identity does not have to be sacrificed on the altar of the relationship. You do not have to shrink to make it fit. In a healthy relationship, conflict is not a catastrophe. Disagreement is not a threat to the relationship's existence. Two people can be upset with each other, work through it honestly, and come out the other side with the relationship intact and sometimes even stronger. The conflict has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It does not cycle endlessly. It resolves. And in a healthy relationship, growth is welcomed rather than threatened. When you change, when you expand, when you discover something new about yourself or your gifts or your calling, the other person celebrates rather than feeling threatened by it or trying to pull you back to be a version of yourself that was easier to manage. That is the map. That is what you are allowed to want. That is what you deserve. And if you are hearing that list and feeling the distance between it and what you are currently living, I want you to stay with me because the rest of this episode is for you. When most people hear the word abuse, their mind goes immediately to physical violence, a hand raised, a bruise, something visible and undeniable. And physical abuse is real, and it is serious, and we are going to name it clearly. But physical violence is only one category of a much broader landscape, and some of the most damaging forms of abuse leave no marks that anyone can see. Understanding the full landscape is one of the most important things you can do for yourself or for someone you love. Physical abuse is any use of physical force intended to hurt, intimidate, or control. Hitting, slapping, pushing, choking, restraining, throwing objects, blocking exits, destroying property in your presence as a show of what could happen to you. It also includes physical neglect in caregiving relationships, denying someone food, sleep, medical care, or basic physical needs as a form of control. Emotional abuse is the consistent pattern of behavior designed to undermine your sense of self and your grip on reality. This includes name-calling and contempt, humiliation in private and in public, constant criticism, withholding affection as punishment, silent treatment used as a weapon, threats, and the persistent message that you are too sensitive, too much, not enough, or lucky anyone puts up with you at all. Emotional abuse is often invisible to people outside the relationship because the person causing harm frequently presents very differently in public than they do behind closed doors. Psychological abuse overlaps with emotional abuse, but specifically targets your perception of reality. Gaslighting is the clearest example, making you doubt your own memory, your own experience, your own sanity. You did not hear what you heard. That never happened. You are imagining things. You're crazy. Combined with isolation from people who might offer a reality check. Psychological abuse can leave a person profoundly disconnected from their own inner knowing and entirely dependent on the other person's version of reality. Financial abuse is one of the least discussed and most effective forms of control. It includes controlling all access to money, preventing someone from working or sabotaging their employment, running up debt in their name without their knowledge, demanding they account for every purchase, taking their income and leaving them financially dependent in ways that make leaving feel impossible. Financial abuse is specifically designed to trap. A person who cannot access money cannot easily leave. Spiritual abuse occurs when someone uses religious or spiritual frameworks to control, manipulate, or harm another person. This includes using scripture to justify abuse, telling someone that God requires their submission and obedience, threatening divine punishment for leaving, using a person's spiritual beliefs against them, claiming special spiritual authority that the other person must defer to, and enlisting a religious community to enforce compliance. Spiritual abuse is particularly insidious because it weaponizes the very thing a person may be turning to for comfort and strength. Sexual abuse within relationships includes any sexual contact or behavior that occurs without full and freely given consent. Coercion, pressure, manipulation, using intoxication, or simply wearing someone down until they comply are all forms of sexual abuse, even within a committed relationship. A relationship does not create an ongoing blanket consent to sexual contact. Every encounter requires its own consent, and the absence of a no is not the presence of a yes. These categories do not always appear in isolation. Many harmful relationships involve multiple forms simultaneously, and the presence of one is often a signal that the others are operating beneath the surface. You do not need to be experiencing all of them for what you are living through to be real and serious and worth taking seriously. Coercive control is the category that explains why so many people stay in relationships that are clearly harming them, why they minimize what is happening, why they feel confused about whether what they are experiencing even qualifies as abuse, and why leaving is rarely as simple as walking out the door. Coercive control was formally recognized as a criminal offense in England and Wales in 2015, and the researcher Evan Stark described it as a pattern of behavior that seeks to take away the person's liberty or freedom and strip away their sense of self. It is not a single incident. It is a climate. It is the accumulated weight of 1,000 small controls that individually might seem manageable or even reasonable, but together create a prison that has no visible walls. Coercive control operates through several overlapping mechanisms. Isolation is one of the primary ones. The person causing harm systematically limits access to friends, family, colleagues, and community, not always through dramatic prohibition, but often through subtler means, creating conflict with the people you are close to, monopolizing your time, expressing hurt or anger whenever you spend time with others, making social connection so costly in terms of the emotional aftermath that you gradually stop pursuing it. Over time, your world shrinks until the person controlling you is the primary or only significant relationship you have, which makes leaving feel not just difficult, but terrifying because there is nowhere left to go. Monitoring and surveillance is another feature. Checking your phone, tracking your location, demanding to know where you are at all times, showing up unexpectedly, reading your messages, controlling your social media. This is framed as love or concern, but is control. Genuine love does not require surveillance. Rules and micromanagement are common. What you wear, who you speak to, what you eat, how you spend money, when you sleep, what you say in public. The rules may shift constantly so that you are always slightly off balance, always slightly in violation of something, and always slightly in debt to the person controlling you. Degradation works alongside the rules, the consistent erosion of your sense of self-worth and competence until you genuinely believe you could not function without the person controlling you. You are too sensitive. You would fall apart without me. Nobody else would put up with you. No one will believe you. You are lucky I stay. And then there is the use of whatever you value most as leverage. Children, finances, community, faith tradition. The threat does not have to be explicit to be real. You learn very quickly what is at stake if you step out of line. What makes coercive control so difficult to name from inside it is that it rarely announces itself as abuse. It often begins as intense attention that feels like love. The monitoring feels like devotion. The rules feel like care. The isolation feels like the natural closeness of a new or deep relationship. By the time the pattern is fully established, you have often been conditioned to interpret your own discomfort as the problem rather than the relationship. Your nervous system has been recalibrated to accept a reality that anyone looking from the outside would recognize immediately as harmful. That recalibration is not weakness. It is the result of a sustained and deliberate process, and it can be undone. Trauma bonding does not only happen in romantic relationships. It happens between children and abusive parents, between congregation members and controlling spiritual leaders, between friends where one person consistently takes and the other consistently gives and absorbs, between employees and manipulative bosses, between siblings where one has always been the scapegoat and the other the favorite. Anywhere that a person who holds power over another alternates between harm and relief, the conditions for trauma bonding exist. The term was coined by researcher Patrick Carnes, and it describes something that happens at a level of brain chemistry, not conscious choice. To understand it, you need to understand what intermittent reinforcement does to the human brain. When reward is unpredictable, when warmth and cruelty alternate without a reliable pattern, the brain's dopamine system goes into overdrive. The same neurological mechanism that makes gambling addictive makes the cycle of harm and reconciliation powerfully bonding. The good moments feel intensely good precisely because they are unpredictable. The relief that follows a period of tension or cruelty creates a powerful biochemical reward. Over time, the person becomes neurologically oriented toward the source of harm in the same way a person becomes oriented towards a substance. The relationship becomes the source of both the wound and the relief from the wound, and separating from it triggers something that functions very similarly to withdrawal. This is why just leave or just cut them off is such an inadequate response to what people in these dynamics are actually experiencing. They are not simply choosing to stay in a difficult situation. They are fighting against a neurological attachment that was formed through a process they did not choose and do not fully understand. The cycle that creates trauma bonding is remarkably consistent across relationship types. Tension builds. An incident of harm occurs. A reconciliation phase follows with apologies, warmth, tenderness, glimpses of the person or the relationship at its best, then a period of calm, then tension again. In a parent and child relationship, this might look like a volatile parent who explodes and then becomes warm and apologetic, leaving the child perpetually hoping that the warm version is the real one and that they can somehow maintain it if they are good enough. In a friendship, it might look like someone who is deeply generous and attentive and then suddenly cold, critical, and withdrawing, leaving the other person scrambling to figure out what they did wrong and how to get back into favor. In a spiritual community, it might look like a leader who offers profound belonging and then withdraws it as punishment for insufficient compliance, leaving the member desperate to regain this sense of divine connection the community seemed to offer. The person caught in a trauma bond is not bonded to the relationship as it is. They are bonded to the relationship as it could be, to the version of the person they have seen in the good moments, to the promises made in the reconciliation phase, to the genuine belief that they can find the right approach, be the right person, love hard enough, or comply fully enough. The good version will become permanent. That hope is not irrational or pathetic. It is the natural response to having seen something real, even if that something real was not sustainable or was being used as a tool. Leaving or limiting a trauma-bonded relationship, whether it's a romantic partner, a parent, a friend, or a spiritual community, requires more than a decision. It requires support, often professional support, a safe place to land emotionally, time for the neurological attachment to loosen its grip, and people around you who understand that missing someone who hurt you or grieving a community that harmed you is not a reason to go back. It is just evidence of how human you are. One of the most powerful things you can do for yourself is learn to recognize the early signals of an unhealthy dynamic before you are deep inside it. This applies to romantic relationships, friendships, spiritual communities, mentorships, and any other significant connection you are considering investing in. Red flags rarely announce themselves as red flags in the beginning. They often arrive dressed as intensity, devotion, passion, or exceptional attentiveness. Part of what makes them so effective is that they frequently feel good at first. Love bombing is one of the most consistent early warning signs across all relationship types. It is the overwhelming flood of attention, affection, flattery, and investment that comes very early in a connection before either person could reasonably have earned that level of devotion. In a romantic relationship, it might look like someone who tells you they have never felt this way before within weeks of meeting you, who wants to be with you constantly, who puts you on a pedestal in ways that feel intoxicating. In a spiritual community, it might look like a leader or group that makes you feel immediately and extraordinarily seen and special, like you have finally found your people and your purpose, like you were chosen for this. Love bombing is significant not because intensity is always a problem, but because genuine connection deepens over time through shared experiences and demonstrated trustworthiness. When intensity arrives before the trust has been earned, it is worth asking what function is it serving. Jealousy and possessiveness framed as love is another early signal. Comments about who you spend time with, discomfort with your existing connections, wanting to know where you are at all times, expressed hurt when you prioritize anything other than the relationship. All of these can arrive in the early stages dressed as caring deeply. Boundary violations that are minimized or laughed off are worth paying close attention to early. When you express discomfort and the response is dismissive, humor at your expense, or a subtle suggestion that you're being oversensitive, you are receiving information about how your boundaries will be treated going forward. A person or community that genuinely respects you will take your discomfort seriously, even if they do not fully understand it. Inconsistency between public and private behavior is a signal worth tracking as well. The person who is warm and generous in public, but critical or cold in private. The spiritual leader who preaches humility but operates with entitlement behind closed doors. The friend who is attentive when they need something and absent when you do. Over time, that inconsistency will tell you which version is the performance and which is the reality. Moving too fast forward exclusively or enmeshment is another pattern worth noting. Relationships that push quickly toward you are my only real friend, or this community is your true family, or I need you to be fully committed before you have had time to observe the dynamic over seasons and circumstances, are asking for your trust before they have demonstrated that they have earned it. Healthy relationships and communities can tolerate the pace at which trust is naturally built. They do not need to rush you past your own discernment. Difficulty with accountability is perhaps the most reliable early signal of all. How does this person respond the first time you raise a hurt or a concern? Do they hear you, take it seriously, and make a genuine effort to adjust? Or do they become defensive, turn it around, minimize your experience, or make you feel that raising the issue was the problem rather than the behavior that prompted it? That first repair attempt tells you an enormous amount about what conflict will look like going down the road. None of these signals in isolation necessarily condemns a relationship. People are complicated, and every connection has rough edges, especially in the beginning. What you are looking for is patterns, clusters of signals, and most importantly, your own body's response. Your nervous system often knows before your conscious mind catches up. If you find yourself consistently anxious, walking on eggshells, making yourself smaller, or working harder than feels sustainable to maintain someone's approval or affection, that physical experience is worth trusting even when your mind is still trying to rationalize it. One of the most disorienting discoveries a person can make on the path toward healthier relationships is that the attraction is not a reliable guide to safety. We have been culturally conditioned to treat the feeling of chemistry, of being drawn powerfully towards someone, as evidence that the connection is right. But the nervous system does not distinguish between what is good for you and what is familiar to you. It responds to pattern recognition. And if the patterns of your earliest attachments involved inconsistency, emotional unpredictability, conditional love, or the need to earn affection through performance or compliance, your nervous system learned to read those patterns as the texture of love itself. This means that a relationship that feels electric and consuming may feel that way precisely because it is replicating something familiar from your history. The anxiety of waiting to find out if someone is pleased with you can feel indistinguishable from excitement. The relief of finally receiving warmth after a period of withdrawal can feel indistinguishable from deep connection. The hypervigilance of monitoring someone's mood can feel indistinguishable from caring deeply. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a feature of how the human attachment system works. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by researchers like Mary Ainsworth, describes the internal working models we develop in childhood based on the consistency and responsiveness of our early caregivers. Those models become the template through which we evaluate all subsequent relationships. A child who grew up with a caregiver who was inconsistent, sometimes warm and sometimes cold or withdrawing, typically develops what researchers call anxious attachment, characterized by hypervigilance around whether affection is still present and a nervous system that is always scanning for signs of withdrawal or abandonment. A child who grew up with a caregiver who was not just inconsistent but actively frightening, a source of both the need for comfort and the source of terror, develops what researchers call disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment. This pattern is particularly significant because it creates what attachment researchers describe as the fundamental paradox. The person who should be your safe harbor is also the person you need to be safe from. And guys, whenever I'm talking about these things, I can tell you from experience that I know exactly how these feel. I do have parents that portray these dynamics. I have had to go no or low contact with them at different times because I have to protect my mental health, my safety, because that is what's important whenever it comes to not just caring for myself, but my own family. If I do not care for myself, if we do not care for ourselves, then we cannot care for our family. So when the person who should be your safe harbor is also the person you need to be safe from, the nervous system has no coherent strategy for this because approach and flee are activated simultaneously. This is the attachment template that most frequently underlies trauma-bonded relationships in adulthood, where the person causing harm is also experienced as the primary source of comfort, and where leaving feels neurologically impossible even when it is clearly necessary. It is extremely hard to go no or low contact because of these patterns that we've been discussing. Healing this pattern is not about making a better choice through willpower. It is about doing the deeper work of helping your nervous system learn a new definition of home. That work happens in safe relationships, in therapy, in community, in the slow accumulation of experiences that prove to your body that closeness does not have to mean danger, that consistency is not boring, that someone who treats you well is not less worthy of your attention than someone who keeps you guessing. It takes time. It takes patience with yourself. And it begins with understanding that the pull you feel towards someone is not always a signal that they are right for you. Sometimes it is a signal that they are familiar, and familiar and healthy are not always the same thing. This is definitely what I had to learn in my early life. And after I went through counseling and healing, after I left my abusive exes, being in a healthy relationship was truly uncomfortable. It was hard for me because I was still waiting for that other foot to fall. Like, oh my gosh, is this fine? And my husband never gave me any kind of reason to feel like that. But they were past triggers that were still there that I was working through in the beginning of our relationship. So of course now, after we've been together for many years, I've definitely learned that this space is safe. And once I truly was in a safe space and I realized it was safe, it took me a while to be comfortable in that safeness. But now that I am, it's so amazing how much more peace that I have in my life, especially in my mind, because the hypervigilance is tamped down. There's not as much hypervigilance. I still am working on that particular trigger, but all my other ones have gone. I've been able to work through them and not be triggered every time he comes and closes a door and is like, we need to talk. And I'm not like, holy crap, someone's about to beat the crap out of me. I'm like, great, we're about to solve another problem, or we're about to have a really great conversation. It's not frightening anymore like it used to be. And so I do encourage you that if you are paying attention to red flags and patterns in the beginning of a relationship, and you're not seeing the red flags, but it's like uncomfortable, don't give up yet and sit with yourself and work through those, because it may just be that it feels uncomfortable because it's not familiar, but that doesn't mean that it's unsafe. Spiritual communities are supposed to be among the safest places a human being can belong to. They are built around shared values, mutual care, and a collective orientation towards something larger than the individual. At their best, they are exactly that. And at their worst, they can become some of the most effective environments for abuse that exist, precisely because the framework of faith provides cover that other institutions do not have access to. The most common mechanism is the weaponization of submission and authority. In communities where spiritual hierarchy is emphasized, where the leader's word is treated as carrying divine weight, where questioning leadership is framed as rebellion against God, the conditions for abuse are structurally in place before any individual abuser arrives. A person who has been taught that their pastor, priest, elder, or spiritual leader has special authority over their life, and that disagreeing with that authority is spiritually dangerous, has been stripped of one of their most important protective mechanisms, their own discernment. When that discernment is treated as the problem rather than as a gift, the person becomes vulnerable to whatever the authority figure decides to do with their power. Scripture and spiritual language are frequently used to enforce harmful dynamics within relationships that exist inside these communities. A spouse who uses the language of headship and submission to justify control is borrowing from a theological framework that the community may actively reinforce. A parent who uses spare the rod to justify physical harm to a child is using scripture as a shield against accountability. A leader who tells a member that their suffering is God's will, or that their discomfort with what is happening is a lack of faith, is using spiritual language to silence a legitimate protective response. Spiritual abuse also operates through the control of information and outside perspective. Communities that discourage engagement with outside voices, that treat questioning as dangerous, that frame the outside world as spiritually contaminated or untrustworthy, are isolating their members in ways that mirror the isolation tactics of individual abusers. When your entire social world, your sense of meaning, your understanding of your own spiritual standing, and your community of belonging all exist within one institution, the cost of raising concerns or leaving becomes existential rather than merely social. There is a specific and particularly painful layer of loss that often accompanies leaving a toxic community or family system that almost no one warns you about adequately. When you leave, the system frequently does not simply let you go, it mobilizes. Remaining members may be turned against you, fed a narrative about why you left that centers your failings rather than the harm you experienced. People you genuinely considered friends may choose the system over you, may pressure you to come back and keep the peace, may act as messengers or intermediaries for the person or community you left. In abuse literature, these people are sometimes called flying monkeys. People who carry out the wishes of a controlling person, often without fully understanding that they are doing so. The grief of realizing that some people you loved will choose the system over you is real, and it deserves to be named as its own distinct loss separate from the larger grief of leaving. It is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of how effectively the system has shaped their loyalty. Accountability is often structurally absent in abusive spiritual communities. When the person in authority is also the person who defines what is true, what is righteous, and who is in good standing, there is no internal mechanism for correction. What genuine spiritual community looks like is worth naming here. Community structured around genuine accountability, where leadership is transparent and subject to correction, where questioning is welcomed rather than punished, where your belonging is not conditional on compliance, where outside relationships and perspectives are not treated as threats, and where the fruit of the company in the people's actual lives is the measure of its health rather than its doctrinal statements or its leader's charisma. Says who that you must stay in a community that is harming you because leaving means leaving God? God was never held inside that building, and God will not be left behind when you walk out the door. Deciding to leave or significantly limit a relationship that is harming you is one of the most courageous things a person can do. It is also one of the most complex, and the guidance that follows is offered within the full understanding that every situation is different and that safety must always be the primary consideration. If you are in immediate physical danger, please prioritize your physical safety above everything else in this section and reach out to the resources listed at the beginning of this episode. The first and most important principle is that leaving is a process, not a single moment. Research on domestic abuse consistently shows that people leave and return an average of 7 times before leaving permanently, and that judgment about this is not only unhelpful, but dangerous because it discourages people from reaching out for help when they are not yet ready to leave for good. Whether you are leaving a romantic relationship, a family dynamic, a friendship, or a spiritual community, give yourself permission to move at the pace that is actually safe for you rather than the pace that looks decisive from the outside. Before you leave, if your situation allows for planning, build your support network quietly. Identify 1 or 2 people you trust completely who can be your safe contacts, people who know what is happening and who will not inadvertently expose your plans. If you are in a physically dangerous situation, contact a domestic violence advocate who can help you create a safety plan specific to your circumstances. Document everything you safely can. Keep records of incidents, messages, and patterns somewhere the person cannot access: a private email account, a trusted friend's home, or a secure app. Documentation matters if you ever need legal protection, and it also matters for your own clarity when the trauma bond pulls you towards minimizing what happened. It is also important if there's children involved. One of the most important things to understand before and during your departure is that the period immediately after leaving a coercively controlling relationship is statistically the most dangerous time. When a person who has relied on control loses that control, their behavior frequently escalates rather than subsides. This is not a reason to stay. It is a reason to plan carefully. After you leave, increase your privacy settings across all platforms. Change your routines, including routes to work and regular locations. Inform your trusted circle that you have left and ask them to be mindful about what they share and with whom. And if you have any reason to believe your physical safety is at risk, contact law enforcement or a domestic violence advocate to discuss a formal safety plan. If finances are a concern, which they often are, particularly in relationships involving financial abuse, begin quietly building whatever small financial independence you can before you leave. A separate account, a small amount of cash set aside, knowledge of your own financial situation, including any accounts or assets that exist in your name. No contact is one of the most effective tools available for protecting yourself after leaving a harmful relationship, and it means exactly what it sounds like. No calls, no texts, no emails, no social media interaction, no checking their profiles, and no responding to contact attempts that come through third parties. Implementing no contact means blocking across every platform and communication channel available to them. And it means preparing yourself for the reality that they will likely attempt to reach you through mutual connections, family members, or new accounts. When those attempts come, and they frequently do, the most protective response is silence. Every response, even an angry one, signals that contact gets a reaction, and reactions invite more contact. Low contact is the appropriate middle ground for situations where full no contact is genuinely not possible, like when you have children with this person. It means reducing all interaction to the absolute minimum required, keeping exchanges brief, factual, and emotionally neutral, and refusing to engage with anything outside the specific necessary topic. This is where the gray rock method becomes an essential tool. Gray rock means becoming as uninteresting and unreactive as possible in your interactions with the person. Short responses, no emotional content, no personal information, no engagement with provocations, accusations, or attempts to draw you into conflict. You are not cold, you are simply boring, and boring does not reward the behavior that was using your reactions as fuel, or as the kids like to call it, being dry. It is also worth saying clearly what most people find genuinely difficult to say out loud. The need for boundaries and even no contact or low contact does not only apply to partners, parents, friends, or spiritual communities. Sometimes it applies to your own children. An adult child who is actively abusive, who steals from you, who manipulates you, who brings consistent harm into your life, who is in active addiction and using that addiction as a weapon against your well-being, is still someone you are allowed to set firm limits with. The love you have for your child does not obligate you to absorb unlimited harm. Parental love is one of the most powerful forces a human being carries, and the grief of needing to limit or step back from a child is in a category of its own. It deserves to be honored as the profound and specific loss it is. But loving your child and protecting yourself from harm are not mutually exclusive. You can love someone completely and still need them to not have unrestricted access to your life. You can hold hope for someone's healing while refusing to be destroyed, waiting for it. The relationship that requires your complete dissolution as the price of its continuation is asking too much, regardless of who that relationship is with. That includes your children, that includes your parents, that includes anyone whose presence in your life has become a source of consistent and significant harm. You are allowed to love them from a distance. And that distance is not abandonment. It is survival. And sometimes it is the most honest act of love available to you. If you are co-parenting with someone who is toxic or narcissistic, full no contact is not available to you, and that reality deserves its own honest conversation. Co-parenting with a harmful person requires a fundamental reframe away from co-parenting toward what practitioners call parallel parenting. Traditional co-parenting assumes two people who can communicate respectfully and make decisions collaboratively in the interest of the child. Parallel parenting assumes that direct communication is harmful and structures around minimizing it as much as possible. In practice, this means using a dedicated communication app such as Talking Parents or Our Family Wizard rather than personal phone numbers or email, keeping every exchange in writing so there is a documented record, limiting all communication strictly to logistics related to the children, never responding to emotional provocations or personal attacks in those exchanges, and making no exceptions to these boundaries regardless of how urgent or reasonable the request is framed. Keep your children out of the middle. Do not use them as messengers. Do not ask them what happens at the other parent's home in ways that put them in a reporting role. Do not speak negatively about the other parent to the children, even when what you want to say is true, because children internalize those messages in ways that ultimately harm them regardless of the accuracy. Be honest with your children in age-appropriate ways when they have direct questions, but let their relationship with the other parent be something they navigate with your support rather than something they feel they have to manage for you. Document everything. Keep records of every communication, every missed exchange, every incident that involves the children, and every violation of the parenting agreement. On the subject of narcissistic dynamics specifically, it is worth naming what makes these situations categorically different from ordinary conflict and why standard approaches to conflict resolution do not work. A person with narcissistic personality disorder or strong narcissistic traits operates from a fundamentally different relational framework. Empathy, as most people experience, is not reliably available. Accountability that does not serve their narrative is not accessible. The goal in conflict is not resolution, but winning. When you challenge a narcissistic person's narrative, when you set a boundary, when you hold them accountable, the response is frequently what researchers call DARVO, D-A-R-V-O, which stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. They deny that the harm occurred. They attack the person raising it, and they reverse the roles so that they become the victim of your unreasonable accusations and you become the perpetrator of harm against them. This pattern is extraordinarily disorienting because it is designed to be. The most important thing to understand about navigating narcissistic dynamics is that you cannot resolve them through better communication, more empathy, or clearer explanation of your experience. What works is gray rock, documentation, firm and consistent boundaries, and the support of a therapist who specifically understands narcissistic abuse. You are not going to get the acknowledgement you deserve. You are not going to get genuine accountability. Accepting that reality, as painful as it is one of the most liberating things you can do because it allows you to stop spending energy on a goal that is not available and redirect it towards protecting yourself and building a life that does not depend on their participation. Therapy with someone who specializes in trauma, coercive control, narcissistic abuse, or religious trauma, depending on your situation, is not optional if you can access it. It is one of the most important investments you can make in your own recovery. Give yourself extraordinary patience in the aftermath. Recovery from a harmful relationship is not linear. You will have days when you feel clear and free and days when you miss the person or the community with an intensity that frightens you. You will second guess yourself. You will grieve things that were genuinely good even inside something that was ultimately harmful to you. All of that is normal and none of it means you made the wrong choice. It means you are human and you loved something, and loss is loss even when what you lost was also hurting you. I personally, whenever I left my last abuser, wrote myself a note of all the bad things that person did. And I did that on purpose because what I did was I carried it with me everywhere until I no longer missed that person. So every time I started missing that person, I looked at that note. I looked at it and I read all the horrible things they did because none of the good overrode the bad ever. And it reminded me every time that I thought, about these good times that I missed and everything else, that the reality of our relationship was completely unhealthy and toxic and abusive. So let us bring it all the way home. You've been handed a set of beliefs about what love requires of you, that loyalty means staying regardless of the cost, that family is forever no matter how they treat you, that forgiveness means reconciliation, that a good Christian, a good spouse, a good child, a good friend, a good community member absorbs harm without limit and keeps showing up. That leaving is failure, that boundaries are selfish, that your discomfort is a spiritual problem to be prayed through rather than a signal to be listened to. And now you know where those beliefs came from. They did not come from the God who made you with a nervous system designed to signal danger. They did not come from the Jesus who told his disciples to shake the dust from their feet when a place was not safe or receptive, a direct instruction to leave and not look back. They did not come from any honest reading of any tradition we have examined across this entire season that understood love as something that requires your deconstruction in order to survive. They came from systems that needed your compliance, from institutions that needed your silence, from individuals who needed your smallness in order to maintain their own sense of power and control, and from the deep human longing to belong, to be loved, to make things work that was exploited by people and systems that did not deserve access to something that tender. Says who that you must maintain every relationship that has ever been given the name of love? Says who that blood makes someone safe? Says who that a title, parent, pastor, partner, friend, child makes someone trustworthy? Says who that your continued presence in a relationship that is harming you is a virtue rather than a wound? Says who that the God who knit you together in your mother's womb, who knows the number of hairs on your head, who calls you beloved, requires you to remain in spaces and with people who are dismantling the very self that God made. Sovereign love looks like this. It tells the truth about what it is experiencing. It sets limits that protect rather than punish. It releases what is not healthy without requiring itself to hate what it is releasing. It grieves honestly because loss is real even when leaving is right. It extends forgiveness as an internal act of liberation rather than a requirement to maintain unsafe access. It chooses people who are doing their own work, who can be accountable without collapsing, who celebrate your growth rather than threatening it, who make you feel more like yourself rather than less. It recognizes that some relationships are for a season and the ending of a season is not a failure. It understands that you cannot pour from an empty vessel and that protecting your own wholeness is not selfishness. It is stewardship of the life you have been given. And one more thing that nobody tells you enough. When you have spent significant time in relationships that kept your nervous system activated, that felt electric because they were unpredictable, that felt like love because they triggered your hypervigilance, a genuinely healthy relationship can initially feel underwhelming. The absence of drama can register as the absence of chemistry. The consistency can feel flat. The person who simply shows up, tells the truth, and treats you well without making you earn it can somehow feel less compelling than someone who keeps you guessing. I want you to hear this clearly. That quiet feeling is not a sign that something is missing. It may be the first time in your life that your nervous system is actually registering safety. And safety, real safety, is not boring. It is the ground on which everything else you have ever wanted to build actually has a chance to grow. Give the undramatic person a chance. Give the steady relationship a chance. Give your nervous system time to learn that calm is not the absence of connection. It is the presence of something that does not need chaos to prove it is real. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to limit. You are allowed to grieve and still know you made the right choice. You are allowed to love someone and still choose not to be harmed by them. You are allowed to have been wrong about someone and to update your understanding without punishing yourself for what you did not know when you did not know it. The most sovereign thing you can do with the love inside you is direct it toward people and places that can receive it without weaponizing it. And that is not giving up on love. That is finally understanding what love was always supposed to be. We have come a long way together. When I recorded the first episode of Noetic Resonance, I had something burning in me that needed to find its way out into the world. A conviction that the people sitting in pews, scrolling through their feeds, lying awake at night with questions they have been told not to ask, deserved honest answers, not performance, not certainty dressed up as faith. Honest, researched, grounded, spiritually serious answers to the questions that actually keep people up at night. Over this first season, we have examined what we were handed. We followed the money through the tithing machine and the wedding industry. We sat with the original Hebrew and Greek and asked what the texts actually say rather than what we were told they say. We traced the origins of hell, of sexual shame, of institutional marriage, of the prosperity gospel, of the canon itself. We looked at where our beliefs came from, who constructed them, who benefited from our compliance with them, and what becomes possible when we are finally willing to ask, says who? And in this final episode, we brought all of that work home to the most intimate place of all, the relationships in our actual lives, the ones that are feeding us and the ones that have been quietly draining us, the ones that reflect the love we were made for and the ones that have been using the language of love to keep us small. I want to close season 1 by saying something directly to you, the person who found this podcast at exactly the right moment. The person who has been listening in their car so nobody else would hear. The person who sent an episode to a friend who needed it. The person who sat with something we covered and felt something loosen in their chest that had been tight for years. The person who pushed back on something I said and went and looked it up themselves. That is exactly what this work is for. You are not supposed to take my word for it. You are supposed to take the thread I am handing you and pull it yourself and see where it leads. That is what sovereignty looks like in practice. That is what Says Who is actually asking you to do. Season 2 is coming July 1st, 2026. And I cannot wait to continue this journey with you guys. We are going deeper, broader, and further into the territory that matters. The library is larger than you were told. The sacred is wilder than the institution allowed. And you are more capable of holding the full truth than anyone gave you credit for. Thank you for trusting me with your ears and your hearts and your seeking this season. It has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. I love you, I see you, and none of us are left behind. Until next time, may your path be aligned, your gnosis be clear, and the veil be ever thin. Our journey continues. Thank you for all the love and support, you beautiful souls.